Hi guys, I'm Mykola Miroshnichenko and welcome to my channel. In this video, we'll cover Navigation3 component, which has just become available for Compose Multiplatform, and we'll integrate it in a Compose Multiplatform app. We will also cover some custom back navigation UI for Android and iOS so that both of our platforms have native UI and feel. Since KMP is still evolving, there are a lot of frameworks that can be used for navigation in Compose Multiplatform, like Decompose, Mako, Voyager, and others. To make our transition from Android easier, we will stick with the official recommended Compose navigation. Since Compose Multiplatform Navigation3 is identical to Android Navigation3, I will not be covering it in detail, and I'll link the official resources for you to read below. In this video, I will simply go over the process of building an app with Navigation3, and I will be explaining my thinking along the way. Okay, so this is the app that we're going to be building. It's a simple static app actually, because all of these items are fetched from a local static repository, but that doesn't matter because we are here to learn the navigation. And yeah, it's a pretty simple app. We have a list, and if we go and we see the details, then we can navigate back. Now let's see how we can implement this with Navigation3. Okay, to use the new navigation library, we will need to upgrade to Compose Multiplatform 1.10 Release Candidate 1, because only this version supports the Navigation3 and it's actually still in alpha, but we will be using it here. So let's see the documentation for that. Okay, so the important thing here is to make sure that we are importing the correct library. Initially, I made the mistake of importing the Android library, and this is something you should be careful with because the Android libraries will resolve in common main, but you will have problems with other targets. So make sure you actually import this JetBrains Navigation3, and we will only need the UI library for now. So we will copy that one over. Okay, if you want to follow along, I will leave a link to this repository below, and the starting code is going to be on the routing exercise start branch. So let's start with importing our Navigation3 UI dependency. And we will put it under our libraries here. And we can check the version of this dependency, and we can see that alpha 06 is the latest dependency. So let's import that one. All right, now let's use this as a reference. And we can import this in our common main dependencies because we are importing the correct dependency and not the Android one. Okay, now let's sync to make sure that it does import. Okay, our dependency has resolved. Now let's actually implement our navigation. So we have our tasking, which is the list of tasks that we are displaying on the main screen. And then we have the task detail screen, which is the individual description of the task. So our goal is to navigate between these two. And we will implement our navigation at the very start of our application inside the app, which we're using actually in our main activity. And in iOS, we're using it in our main view controller. So that's the starting point for our application. Now, I'm not gonna go over the Navigation3 here in detail because I believe that Google is doing a good job at explaining to us what their libraries do. And in this video, I will simply go over the implementation and explain what I'm doing along the way. Now, the biggest change, of course, in Navigation3 is that we can control our backstack. So we will start by implementing the very start of our backstack. And we need to specify our type here as to what we are going to be holding. Okay, let's do some imports here. Now this won't resolve, of course, yet because we don't have our keys yet. And the way that this works in Navigation3 is that we have a list of keys that represent certain screens or composables in our application. So for the lists, we're gonna start off with our task list key. And it's gonna be a data object. And we will extend from another component of the navigation library called the nav key. The nav key is actually another component of the Navigation3 library, which is simply an interface that we have to implement so that our keys can be serialized when there is a process death or a configuration change. And to actually do that, we have to annotate it with a serializable annotation. Now in this video, we will not be implementing the saving of our backstack, but I decided to show this to you just because it's a good practice to have it in general. So we have our key for the task list. Now we need another key for our task detail. However, our task detail will actually take a task ID as a parameter. So we have to change this to data class and provide it with a task ID. The reason where we're giving this a task ID is because it's required by our task details screen. And I'll show you how that works with key interaction further in our code. Okay. Now let's implement our navigation logic. Now the actual UI component that handles all of the UI navigation is something called a nav display. And the nav display takes our backstack as one of its parameters. And another parameter that it takes is our entry provider, which essentially provides all of our navigation logic. And I'm going to be using a Navigation3 DSL here. So we will create an entry provider and we will import it. And inside our entry provider, we will specify our screens and interaction between these screens. And the way we do that is we map our screens to these keys that we have defined above, with the task list being our first key. So let's specify these entries. And we'll start with the task list key that we already have, but now we'll provide the logic for it. Here we will put our task lists screen composable. Now our task list screen here has a lambda that indicates what we should do after a task is clicked in our lists. So what we want to do is we want to go to the details of that screen. And how we can do that with our navigation is by doing what actually our Copilot recommends here. And it here is actually our task ID that is provided inside our task list. So what this does is essentially says add to the backstack whatever is associated with our tasks detail key. But we don't really have anything defined here for this entry. So now let's build our task detail key entry. Okay, and inside, let's provide our task detail screen. Now we have a small problem. Our task detail screen takes our task ID. So how can we provide our task ID here? Well, a great thing about Navigation3 library is that these entries actually provide us with our keys that we have defined above. So we can use our key, which is a task detail key, and get our task ID right from there. So we can go key task ID because this key right here is of the type task details key. And one final thing that we have to provide to our task details screen is we have the on back lambda. So what do we want to do in case we press the on back button from our detail screen? And of course, we want to get rid of our detail screen and we want to navigate back. The way we do that is by popping our backstack. And we can do that by doing a backstack remove last or null. And that's pretty much it. So once again, our keys are associated with certain screens or composables that we have. We have a backstack that we can control ourselves, and we have a nav display, which actually does navigation for us. It actually provides us with the animations as well. We give it our backstack. And finally, we have our entry provider here, which is essentially the logic that we want to execute for our navigation. Now let's launch this and see if it works. Okay, so we have our app. And now let's press buy groceries. And yes, we're navigating to our buy groceries. Now let's go back and our backstack is popped. Now let's go somewhere else and press the back button on our system navigation. And you can see that we're also getting a little animation here. Now let's check this on iOS. All right, so our app has launched. Now let's test it. Okay, we're navigating to the detail screen. Now let's go back and it's going back fine. So you can see that the Navigation3 that we have here is working really well on both of our platforms, even though it's still in alpha. Now, another thing that I just wanted to mention is that everything is identical to the Android implementation, except for the dependency. So make sure that you're importing the right dependencies. In Android, it goes into simply in the dependencies block and there's a stable version. And in KMP, it goes into common main as we already put it. And the version is still in the alpha. So make sure you're importing the right dependencies and don't make mistakes. Now, one of the big concerns from iOS developers in terms of adoption of KMP and Compose Multiplatform is that it's still missing some of the native features that iOS system has. For example, the back swipe, which is default on iOS, previously was not supported in Compose and Kotlin Multiplatform, but in the latest versions, and as you can see in this video that I recorded from my phone, the back swipe is working seamlessly. However, if you notice, we are still missing one small detail for the iOS builds to look completely iOS native, and that is the back navigation button. iOS has a different chevron type of back navigations, so let's implement that here. Okay, so if we go to our task detail screen, we can see that we have the default Android auto mirror arrow back icon. iOS has something called arrow back iOS. Now, the icon packs have been split not long ago, so if we want to get the arrow back iOS, we have to download the extended edition of Material 3 icons. So let's do that and import this dependency. Okay, now let's declare the dependency and we will put it below our core icons. We'll call these extended icons, and all we need to do is just substitute the core for extended and then import that in our build Gradle. Now let's sync this. Awesome, we have imported our extended icons. And by the way, don't worry that this library might take up a lot of space. Compose Multiplatform runs ProGuard on release builds by default, so all of the unnecessary icons will be stripped. And now let's implement our back button for iOS. For this, we will use the expect actual mechanism of KMP. Okay, now let's declare a file at our top level here called back nav vector image, and declare our expect function back button image vector. and the type is going to be image vector. Okay, now let's import this type. Awesome. And now we have to declare our actuals, one for Android. Here we'll just copy over what we had previously. Let's go back to our task detail screen and copy this over. And import. And now let's go to the iOS side. First we'll copy this over because we'll need it. And let's just put this over here. And import. Now for iOS, we will import arrow back iOS. And this will give us the chevron that we need for the iOS version. And now let's simply invoke this function where we have our original image vector. And now let's launch and see if it worked. Okay, and as you can see, we have our nice chevron, which is native to iOS here. Now let's launch Android to verify that it works as well. Okay, we have our Android here. And for Android, we have the Android icon. So both of these platforms now work with Navigation3 and have their own navigation specifics. This is pretty much it. This has been a short introduction to Navigation3 and some platform-specific navigation details. Thank you guys for watching. And if you like this video, please put a like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next video.